The emergency beacon cut through the void like a scream, and nobody expected anyone to answer because this sector was abandoned for good reasons. But Jake Turner was never one to follow the rules properly, and his small cargo ship changed course. Immediately toward the distress signal, the wreckage floated in pieces around a dying star, and Jake could see the elegant curves of a ship design he had never encountered before in his 15 years of hauling supplies across the outer colonies. And something about those curves made his heart beat faster, because they were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. 3 life signs flickered on his scanner, and Jake brought his ship close enough to extend the boarding tunnel. And when the airlock opened, he saw her for the first time and forgot how to breathe properly because she was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like bronze under lamplight and eyes that held the depth of entire galaxies within them. Her name was LyraX, and she held 2 younger females close to her body, and both of them looked at Jake with a mixture of fear and desperate hope that made his chest ache in ways he could not explain. And LyraX spoke in a language that sounded like music mixed with thunder, and his translation device struggled to keep up with the complexity. "They are my daughters, and we will die here if you do not help us, and our enemies will find us soon." Jake did not hesitate because hesitation meant death in space, and he guided them onto his ship and sealed the airlock behind them, and already he could see the dark shapes appearing on his scanner and moving fast toward their location. The attackers came in sleek fighters that moved like sharks through water, and Jake pushed his cargo ship harder than he ever had before, and LyraX stood beside him in the cockpit, and her hands moved over his control panels with surprising knowledge, and together they flew through the debris field like dancers who had practiced this routine their entire lives. Her daughters huddled in the back cabin, and Jake could hear their frightened sounds through the ship walls, and something protective awoke in him that he thought had died years ago when he lost his family to raiders, and he would not lose anyone else today. The fighters fired, and Jake's ship shuddered under the impact, and warning lights flashed red across every surface, and LyraX reached over, and her hand covered his on the controls, and warmth spread from that touch like fire through his veins, and suddenly the ship responded better and faster, and they dove toward the dying star itself. No human pilot would follow them there because the radiation would cook their ships in minutes, but Jake had modified his shields for exactly this kind of stupid maneuver, and he grinned as the fighters broke off and scattered away from the star's burning embrace. They escaped into the darkness, and Jake set course for the nearest safe port, and LyraX watched him. With those galaxy eyes, and something passed between them that needed no translation device to understand. "You saved our lives, and my people have a debt that can never be repaid with simple gratitude." Jake shrugged because he did not do it for payment, but LyraX placed her hand over her heart and then over his, and the gesture felt sacred in ways that made him uncomfortable and honored at the same time. When they reached the port station, LyraX's people were there waiting, and they came in ships that made Jake's cargo hauler look like a child's toy, and they were tall and bronze and beautiful and dangerous, and they surrounded him with gratitude and respect that felt heavy on his shoulders. But it was LyraX who approached him 3 days later in the station cantina, and her daughters stood behind her, and they all wore robes of deep purple that marked some kind of ceremony or importance. "You have given us life, and by the old laws of my people, a life debt must be honored in the way that binds families together forever." Jake did not understand until she spoke the words clearly, and his translation device made sure he heard every syllable with perfect clarity. "I offer you my daughters in marriage if you will have them, and through this bond you become family, and our people become your people, and your enemies become our enemies, and we stand together against the darkness that exists between stars." Jake's mouth went dry, because this was not how he expected his week to go, and he looked at the 2 daughters, and they were both beautiful and young, and their eyes held the same depths as their mother, and they watched him with something like hope mixed with nervousness. The older daughter stepped forward, and her name was Maya, and she spoke with a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "We know this is strange to your people, but we have watched you, and we see your honor and your courage, and these are qualities my people value above all else, and we would be proud to call you family." The younger daughter, whose name was Kate, nodded, and her eyes sparkled with something like mischief that reminded Jake of his sister before the raiders came. "Plus, you fly really well for someone who uses such an old ship, and that is attractive to us." Jake laughed because he could not help it, and the sound broke the tension that had filled the cantina, and other patrons turned to watch this strange meeting between human and alien. and Jake realized that his answer would change everything. He looked at Lyanna and saw the fierce love she had for her daughters and the desperation hiding behind her proud exterior because her people were hunted and scattered, and they needed allies and they needed protection, and Jake had given them that. He looked at Maya and Kate and saw genuine interest in their eyes and not just duty, and they smiled at him with hope and humor, and Jake thought about his empty ship and his empty life, and how he had been drifting through space for years without purpose or direction. The old ways of your people, and are your daughters agreeable to this arrangement, or do they do this only from duty? Lyanna smiled, and it transformed her face into something radiant and warm. Me daughters chose you before I made the offer, and they are not forced into anything against their will, and we are not barbarians. Despite what the galaxy thinks of us, as Maya stepped closer and took Jake's hand in hers, and her skin was warm and smooth, and her touch sent electricity up his arm. I choose this freely, and I choose you. Kate took his other hand and grinned at him with that mischievous sparkle still in her eyes. I also choose this, and I think we will have many adventures together. Jake stood there, holding the hands of two alien women who wanted to marry him, and their mother watched with approval, and his mind spun with the impossibility of it all. But his heart had already made the decision before his brain could catch up. Then I accept, and I promise to honor and protect your daughters as they deserve, and to stand with your people against any who would harm them. The cantina erupted in cheers, and Jake realized that Lyanna's people had filled every table, and they had been waiting for his answer, and now they celebrated with drinks and music that sounded like nothing he had ever heard before. And Maya and Kate pulled him into the celebration, and Lyanna placed her hand on his shoulder and squeezed with surprising strength. You have given me peace in my final years, and my daughters will be safe with you, and our people will remember this alliance when the Great War comes. Jake wanted to ask about the Great War, but Maya was pulling him toward the dance floor, and Kate was laughing, and the music swelled, and he let himself be swept away into this new, strange, wonderful life that had dropped into his lap. The wedding ceremony happened 3 days later, and it involved lights and songs and vows spoken in both languages, and Jake stood between Maya and Kate and promised to love and protect them, and they promised the same to him. And when it was done, they were family in ways that transcended species, and culturally Anna watched from the front row, and tears ran down her bronze cheeks, and she smiled with pure joy. And Jake understood that he had given her something precious, and her daughters had given him something equally valuable. That night in their shared quarters on the station, Maya and Kate sat with him and explained their culture and their history, and Jake learned that they were refugees from a war that had consumed their homeworlds, and that their people were scattered across the galaxy, and that they desperately needed allies. And you chose me because I happened to be in the right place. Kate shook her head, and her eyes were serious now without the mischief. We chose you because you risked everything to save strangers, and that is the mark of someone worth knowing and worth loving. Maya nodded and took his hand again, and because you did not hesitate, and hesitation means death in space and in life, and we need someone who will act when action is needed. Jake looked at his new wives and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a comfortable blanket, and he thought about his old life of hauling cargo and running from memories, and he realized that he did not want that anymore. Then we should probably get a bigger ship. They both laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth, and Jake knew that his life had changed forever, and that he would face whatever came next with Maya and Kate beside him and Lyanna's people at his back. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, their enemies were gathering, and the Great War was coming, and Jake Turner, former cargo hauler and now husband to 2 alien princesses, would stand in the gap and fight.